Hello, everyone. Welcome back to LoFi History with me, Libba. And we also have our historians here, Glenn and Marie. Hello, Glenn and Marie. How are y'all doing today?
Doing good.
I'm good.
Wow, Glenn, you sound a little strange there. What's going on? You got a cold or something?
No, I just felt like saying it that way.
Oh, okay. Well, you also felt like looking that way, which we always start with what y'all are wearing, and I see we've got different. I wonder how different of a time span we've got going on today. So why don't we start with you, Glenn, then we'll go into Marie, but. Perhaps I should also say, anyone who's new here, welcome.
Oh, yes.
This is LoFi History at the Northeast Georgia History Center, and we are here to answer your history questions. So go ahead and type your history questions in the chat as we talk to Glenn and Marie about their wonderful historic costumes today. So, Glenn, what do you got going on today?
I'm wearing a scratchy coat. As often happens here at the History Center, we had a great school group come through this morning, for which I portrayed a Confederate soldier from the Civil War. And so that just transfers right on into lo-fi history. So that's what I have on. I have on just a cool black felt hat, big wide brim to keep the sun and the rain off of me, and a Civil War Confederate jacket, better known as a Columbus Depot.
A Columbus Depot? Is there? I mean,
Columbus
why is
Depot,
that?
because
was it made in Columbus?
Yes.
What?
In and around. Well, I mean, not this one. The one it
Right.
represents. So in the armies around Georgia and Atlanta, they were supplied by Georgia and Atlanta factories and industry and things like that. So this is a very common style of coat. It's the 5-button front, blue cuffs, and a blue collar. On sort of a short jacket. It just comes up to your natural waist. Usually made of jean cloth, which is a cotton weft wool warp. I may have that backwards. Cotton and wool combined, jean cloth. Using some of the materials the South had, but it is a very common coat in the Army of Tennessee. And I love this coat because it's so representative. It's a Georgia-made product of soldiers from Georgia that fought in Georgia. And that's why I like to wear it, to kind of bring it home for all the kids that come, and try to show them as many Confederate, when I'm portraying a Confederate, as many Confederate-y products from Georgia and from the Western theater as possible.
It's interesting that you mentioned Columbus. I mean, I'm familiar with Columbus since I used to work at the National Civil War Naval Museum down there, but I didn't realize that there was a lot of textile manufacturing during the Civil War in Columbus. It makes sense.
Yeah, a ton of it.
Yeah,
because Columbus was we modern folks, collectors, historians call this a Columbus Depot. They didn't call it a Columbus Depot, but there are different depots in the South that produce things. And what they would do is, instead of having a huge building with a lot of women sewing in the one room, they would have the pattern laid out. They would cut the pieces up, and they would make kits for an entire coat. And then they would put those kits in a package and deliver 5 or 6 to the ladies around. And by the end of the week, those ladies would come and turn in the finished jacket and get some more. They would get paid piecework.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Well, of course, what that means is the quality of uniform is defined by how good the seamstress is at home sewing it.
Yeah.
So you could get something really well made. You could get something that falls apart quickly. You could get something where the arms are put on different sides and things like that. So quality could vary.
Right.
With this sort of cottage industry approach to mass production.
It's kind of like the at-home factory model.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
not factory, but it's not cottage. It's somewhere in between.
Right.
But I mean, if they made them too bad, they just wouldn't send them to that lady anymore, and she wouldn't get the money anymore.
Right, yeah.
So
It does make me feel better, though, because like when I make historical things where I'm just like, you try to make it as accurate as possible, but then you also realize that they made mistakes too.
They made a lot of mistakes, and you can't make it too nice sometimes because it's, as we used to say, that's the beauty of a handcrafted product, right? When you look at some of and going back into the medieval period, you look at some of the even cloaks and tunics that they had. They are pieced together out of like little tiny pieces that you sew together. They're all pieced. Now, that being said, in the hardcore Civil War reenactment community, one of the things people look at are those all the buttonholes have to be hand sewn. They have to be hand sewn.
People, I don't know why they will die on Buttonhole Hill, but they will.
But here's the thing, and maybe some of my campaigner friends are watching and they're going to chastise me. These have hand sewn buttonholes. They're very, very neat. Look at that. Isn't that very neat? It's very well done.
It almost looks machine done.
Oh.
Doesn't it? Doesn't it? I have seen, especially on some of those officer-made uniforms where there were professional tailors making them, I would swear to you, knowing that this coat was made in the 1860s, well before machine-sewn buttonholes, that buttonhole was sewn by machine. It is so perfect.
Yeah, right.
So,
well, I won't judge you.
It's a trade-off.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a trade-off.
Yeah. Now, I see we've got our usual suspects are here. Hello, Terry.
Hello.
Hi. Terry says hello from hot Iowa. Now, I wonder, Terry, what is hot to you? I wonder what the temperature is today in Iowa. Apparently, it's 79 degrees outside here in Georgia, which is not bad.
That's a light spring day.
That's a light spring day.
Anything that doesn't get up to 90, I consider
right.
a nice, pleasant day.
Yeah. Well, hope you are able to cool off inside. It's great to have you again, Terry. Richard is also here. Hello, Richard. One of our wonderful living history interpreters. Laura is also here. Hey, Laura.
Hey.
Josh is joining us as usual.
Yay.
Josh. Noah is here. Hello, Noah.
Hey, Noah.
And Karen and Alma are also here. Hello, Karen and Alma. Now, Karen has a quick question about your coat. Is it gray or is it butternut, which is a very specific color? I like that.
Ah, yes. So this one is mostly gray. It is not a cadet gray, which is the finely dyed deep gray that you think of, which is what the uniform specs for the Confederacy technically said. This one has, you can see flecks of darker and lighter material in it, but it is gray. She's talking about butternut because a lot of times the uniforms, almost all of them to be accepted, had to be
butternut
gray.
Is almost more this color.
Right,
yes. But what happens is the gray dyes that they had available were not very fast. And so this is closer to the natural color. You dye it gray, but as sun and wind and sweat wear on it, that dye fades away and you leave it butternut, which is like it's butternut. It's a very light brown.
Yeah, so kind of both in
Yes.
a way.
I had bought this wool to make Confederate uniforms, and then I decided I didn't want to do that, and I made myself a kirtle instead.
There you go.
Well, that's a perfect transition. So, Marie, what are you wearing and when are you wearing?
So I am, I'm going to the Ren Fair this weekend, so I decided to dig out my Ren Fair costume. So this is it's not completely historically accurate, I know, but it is a fairly good representation of what we believe, like a middling sort of peasantry would have worn during the Tudor era. Particularly, I'm thinking like early Tudor, so reign of King Henry VIII.
Okay.
So being a kirtle. I'm still working on getting the correct underdress. I'm actually just wearing a Ren Fair, like generic Ren Fair shirt, but it had the right puffy sleeves that are supposed to go with this. But I'm still working on the shift that goes under it.
Nice.
But otherwise, it's just a kirtle. I'll stand up so people, because
it's
really
like I've
the waist.
Heard of that kirtle before.
Kirtle. Because it's really the waist shape.
Oh, okay.
Is like the fun part.
Yeah.
It goes down very, very low. It has nice box pleats. I made fun trim out of fabric myself.
Yeah.
It opens down the front, and this is kind of what you would have when you think of like Anne Boleyn and like the 6 Wives of King Henry.
Right.
Whenever they're wearing things, their underdress is a kirtle.
A kirtle. Okay.
Yes.
Got it. Yeah.
So I could like wear more things over this, and it becomes like fancier. Except for that, this is not made to do that. It is not. It is just a wool dress, a wool kirtle.
Yeah.
So it's more of a middling kind of peasantry look.
I love it, and perfect for Renfest.
Yes.
And I also see this beautiful little flower crown. Now, I would imagine that would be a fun thing to make in Tudor times as well, or is that more like a just fairy tale romanticized?
It's definitely a Ren Fair thing.
Okay.
But also, flower crowns would have been worn, like, people just like flowers.
Yeah.
People have been putting flowers in their hair forever. And they would have they're more traditionally used when celebrating May Day, so the first day of May. when you dance around the maypole, which goes all the way back to the 1400s, it would be traditional that you wear flower crowns at that point, because that's like the first day of spring. You're welcoming spring. You wear flowers in your hair. So they would have done that, but wearing it every day, that's a personal choice.
Yeah.
But they would have, like, flower crowns would have been a thing that have been traditionally worn on May Day celebrations.
Very cool, very cool. Well, looking lovely, both of you. And I see we've also got some more folks join us. Robert just joined us. Hello, Robert. Good to see you. So before we dive into our questions, I did want to share some really cool events that we have coming up with everyone. So first of all, let's talk about, yes, tomorrow you will have a chance. If you are not a member, then we are releasing programs from our 2021 members season, and tomorrow is Elephants, Donkeys, and Uncle Sam, the political cartoons of Thomas Nast. So if you look on our Facebook events, you'll see that's tomorrow, or our website, that's tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern. And this is going to be a really great rerun from our season last year. And of course, if you want to become a member, why, I can throw information in the chat for you about that. But go to our website, click on Become a Member, because you can see really cool programs like historic candle making demonstrations. Yeah. So Marie put this together. This is going to be this Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. We're going to go into a brief history, just an overview of like, when did we start using candles? And then going into an actual demonstration by Marie of what would it have been like to make candles at home in the 19th century or thereabouts. And then we also have a lot of awesome summer camps coming up. We have a virtual summer camp about the Civil War from June 6th to 10th. And we also have another virtual summer camp about the American Revolution starting June 27th. So if you are interested, if you are between the ages of 8 and 12 or know a history nerd between the ages of 8 and 12, this is the perfect event for them. But we also have a really fun day camp here at the Northeast Georgia History Center on June 17th. So I hope that if you know some young historians, then do tell them about us. We're going to have a lot of fun through our virtual summer camps.
You know, all right. Looking at those photos, I realized that we've fallen victim to something that people who love their jobs do.
What?
Did you notice in those camp promotional pictures, we're all smiling and so happy because we love it. And yet it's like the American Civil War, millions dead, a nation ripped asunder. Yay!
But there are some fun
The American
things.
Revolution, breaking apart from Great Britain. Yay!
Yeah!
But there's also Cornhusk dolls. Yay! And so much more. Yes. We have a great time. We've done virtual summer camps for 2 years in a row now. And
Yes.
Really looking forward to this one. This is going to be a fun new day camp for us, all about Georgia history too. So check that out on our website at www.negahc.org/summer. And once I actually get into the chat, I will throw information in there so you can easily click on it. But without further ado, let us get to our first question of the day. And this is actually going back to last LoFi. We weren't able to get to Josh's question. And so last time Josh asked, and I'm glad that you're here, Josh, how did the Germans depropagandize after World War II, and how did the population react to the shock? That's a great question. So I mean, what was the feeling after World War II in German? I mean, was there acknowledgement of the Holocaust immediately? I mean, what was just the like, oh, what do we do now? We've just gotten done with a devastating war, and this transition to, like Josh said, to depropagandize after World War II. What was that like?
That is such a complex thing, because it wasn't a universal, easily done thing. You know, to contextualize it in a nutshell, one of the ways that Nazism worked so effectively is because it controlled every bit of information in the state, not just news, but where to buy your butter, where to listen to the radio, how to put your crafts right. They had summer camps too for the Hitler Youth, and you would go every summer. And that particular generation of kids that were, 8, 10, 12, when the Nazis came to power, they're the ones who are military age by the time you get to the actual war in the later years of the war. I want you to think about kids who have their entire cognizant life been inculcated with a single political, racial ideology. It is very hard to undo that literal brain programming, right? The adults, it was a little bit easier. Adults have a better, especially the ones that were alive before, have a little bit better framework to see the world outside of National Socialist Germany. But many Germans refused to believe that Germany had become as evil as it actually was. So when things came out after the war, part of the depropagandizing was really re-propagandizing from a particular point of view, right? The Allies have to come into Germany and basically say, you were told this? No, look at this. You were told this? No, look at this. And that was part of the Nuremberg trials. That was a big part of the Nuremberg trials weren't just to bring war criminals to justice. It was to, on a huge national scale, basically broadcast the reality of the evils of the entire upper government administration.
Because they weren't being tried just for war crimes. They were charged with crimes against humanity.
Right. And so the Nuremberg trials were a big part of that. And as time went on, part of the re-propagandizing was, quite honestly, Nazis bad. We're your friends. You know who's not your friend? The communists, right? Especially in Western, because Germany gets divided. And as a result, you have East and West Germany. So a big part of the re-propagandizing of Germany was to recast who the real enemies of freedom were.
Or if you're in the communist part of Germany, then of course
who the real heroes of the war were, right?
I see, right.
So they now perhaps I'm biased, but I think that the East Germans under the yoke of Stalin's communism tended to just be, there was only a little turn of the switch from one totalitarian regime to the other, right? They were sort of, it had been programmed to believe and do a certain thing, and so when a new and certain thing came out but expected many of the same things, it wasn't that big a leap until word began to leak into East Germany from West Germany how much better the West Germans were doing after the war, because the United States especially, another part of the depropagandizing was the Marshall Plan, right? Rebuilding Europe with American materials, resources, and dollars, and billions of American dollars in aid flowed into Europe, including Germany. And very, very quickly, West Germany, the economy, the infrastructure, the buildings, was all rebuilt. And the East Germans, they can look over a wall and say, the Soviets sure aren't helping us rebuild very fast. As a matter of fact, they took most of the things that made our economy work. That's not good. So it was a fairly rapid process in the West. It was a much slower process in the East. That's the quick and dirty version.
Also a reforming of their national identity, because their national identity was literally crushed.
Right.
And this idea, their flag was changed, their nation was separated, and then you have the reunification of Germany, a rebuilding of a German identity, things that we think of as traditionally German, like German architecture, German food. Well, not so much the food. That wasn't as Naziized because it's food. But like traditional German dress, like the lederhosen and the dirndl. Everyone, it was very like hardcore drilled into this idealized Aryan German nation under Hitler. And then there was a time where after they just kind of pushed it all
anything
to a side.
Traditionally German, right? Not even Nazi, just German.
Yeah. So it became a shifting ground after World War II of basically everyone just pushed it aside, and it was a very slow reintroduction of things that were traditionally German without the Nazism.
You're right.
Trying to
Oktoberfest and bratwurst and
wearing your lederhosen and dirndls without being a Nazi.
Well, maybe food and fun clothing is like, there's something we can all agree on. It's good.
I think we've talked about this. Back when Germany became a nation state under a king in the 1870s, they chose the Prussian model to form Germany around, but they could have just as easily chosen Bavaria. And then Germany would have been based on eating sausages and drinking beer rather than militarism. What a world difference that would have made.
Yeah, right. What a big what if.
We will invade every country, and then you must drink beer with us every October.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for that question, Josh, from last time. We're going to get into today's questions. I'm not sure if this is going to be in y'all's wheelhouse or not, but I believe this is from Laura. Laura says, I know it's a complicated issue, but I'd love to understand the Israeli-Palestinian conflict better. Yeah, both of you are just like, oh no. But
How much time do we have?
I know.
Let's go back to the beginning of time.
Is this something that y'all feel confident about, like giving a brief overview of, or are there resources you could point Laura into the right direction?
As a historian, this is still going on, so it's also a modern issue.
Right, yeah. A lot of what we focus on here is like, I don't know, the furthest we go is basically like Vietnam most of the time, with our topics and stuff.
I mean, I can sum it up in one sentence. Since biblical times up to the present day, the conflict has been about who will control the resources in a resource-poor area.
I think that's the most succinct
and
way.
Yeah, and then you throw culture and religion and outside interference from areas that have more resources and more unified nation states. Also vying, trying to pick sides. I'm not even talking about modern day. I'm talking about going all the way back.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That has continued. That's sort of the recipe that has gotten us to where we're at in that region. And the fact that the region has come to be oil rich has only exacerbated the issue.
Yeah, right. I was going to. I mean, this is kind of related. You brought up the whole religious aspect of it. I actually started listening to a very good Great Courses Plus on the beginnings of Judaism, which I know is like, if you want to go way back to understand the conflict, I mean, that might be an interesting dive to take. That's not directly related, but it is sort of foundational to understanding the religious aspects of whose homeland, so to speak, is this.
Right.
It's also a culturally important site to three of the main world religions of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity.
Right.
There are so many different religious important sites within there as well. So not only is it resource heavy, it's also religiously significant, and who can control that, who can go to that. Even when we talked about the Crusades.
Yes.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Who's going to control Jerusalem is a huge issue for that, and it's probably one of the most hotly contested pieces of land.
Continues. That's a good idea. Libba, you saying podcast? That's a great idea. That's and lecture series. If you're like us and you like to listen to history when you're commuting, doing that is great. The one that I've listened to the most is a history of the city of Jerusalem.
Oh, cool.
Which has to bring all those things in together with all the way back to why was Jerusalem built where it was built.
Yeah.
To the different religions that get involved, to the modern day, post World War II, Israeli independence, PLO, all the stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm gonna just put this as a topic that maybe we can have a guest on sometime. I've been thinking that one aspect of history that I'd like to dive into is American Judaism in general, and I'm sure that there's an interesting American perspective on that conflict too. So I'll throw it in there. Yeah. So Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Okay. The weird things you type in a day.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Laura. I'm sorry we can't go in depth with that, but it's a great idea for a topic that, like we were saying, there's so many different angles we could come to just the land of Jerusalem itself. So thank you for at least planting that seed for a program later. And if you do find any really good resources, Laura, do feel free to message us. So, be careful with the table.
The table, they're not doing it again.
Sounds like an earthquake.
I've become very passionate about some things, and it makes the microphone. Sorry, folks.
No worries. So our next question, and if you're curious, I am taking questions in order as they are received. So our next question comes from Noah. And Noah wants to know, how familiar are you with the Chicago World's Fair or the Columbian Exposition? That's actually funny. I actually listed that as a program I'd like to dive into soon. I can't remember if it was, it was because, Marie, you might remember through our research with the mill program that we did. We did a members-only program about working in a mill during the 19th century, or a factory, and the factory model itself. And many machines of America's factory model was brought to this exposition, and it was sort of to showcase this, like, commercial utopian, a commercial utopia. That was it. Which was quite the opposite for most people working in a factory in the 1800s. But it was this big idea of, look at all these massive machines and how much we can produce. But when it comes to the fair, this was in 1893. Do y'all have any factoids that you already know about it, or?
I really don't.
I have nothing particular other than it's a World's Fair, and therefore people come and display the newest and greatest, best products. So in the 1890s, what are the newest, bestest, great products? Well, you have the automobile, and of course we haven't gone through with like the whole Henry Ford model yet, but there are some really interesting like pre-runners of like people coming up with things which basically look like horseless carriages,
right?
Which are very fun, and they did not drive well because they also had like wagon wheel situations going on. And
they were just buggies with an engine stuck on top of them.
Trying to drive it did not, I don't think, work out super well, and also they went super slow, and they were loud and noisy, and people hated them. Because it was also only rich people who could get it, so it's just rich people going around being crazy. And then electricity, of course, would be demonstrated in all of the new things that they are doing with electricity at that time. Of course, electricity has been around, but in the 1890s is when it's like not quite hit its heyday, but it's expanding rapidly. So, of course, the World's Fair itself is going to be lit up. I think the more I'm talking, the more I'm like remembering things. I think that they were very much wanting to display electricity, and like very much wanted it to be like people were like remarking upon, even though it's dark outside, like I can still see so much because they had so many light bulbs there. Just lighting up the entire fair itself. And also a fair is a place that you go for leisure and fun and activities. So that's, you're going to have fun things to eat. And, it's like a fair that we do today. You have things to watch, demonstrations to watch, things to eat. It's a convention where people are going to come to show off, but also come together for entertainment and enjoyment.
And learn about the world of tomorrow today.
Yeah.
Basically, it's Epcot.
Yeah.
It kind of is, yeah. And I'm reading here that elevators were introduced. The zipper was introduced. Cracker Jacks, like the snack. The popcorn snack was introduced. The Ferris wheel. The first voice recording. And more. Is what this says. That's actually, I'd like to dive into that. I wonder, I'm going to check on the chat to see if there's anybody who wanted to add to that. Yeah.
It's so funny. The only World's Fair I know about is growing up in rural North Georgia. When it came to Knoxville in 1982, it was the biggest deal because it was so close. I just remember all the commercials on the 3 networks that we got on the antenna was the 1982 World's Fair. You got to be there. And now the little globe tower is still in Knoxville. I don't think there's much left there. But that's, from my youth, that's the only real experience I have of World's Fairs.
It also came to Nashville, and that's where the Pantheon building went. If you ever wondered why we have a recreation of the Pantheon, that beautiful Greek building in Nashville, Tennessee.
Yeah.
It is because of a World's Fair.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah, so they actually,
Parthenon.
Oh, I'm sorry, Parthenon.
Oh,
I always
the Pantheon's
do
in Rome. No, the Pantheon's in Rome.
Oh.
Yes.
But they're so similar.
Parthenon. Yeah, right.
I mean, in
Parthenon,
name,
Pantheon.
they look totally different.
They look totally different. So if I looked at it, I would be able to know. But
right.
they both start with P.
The Parthenon.
The Parthenon. So if you're ever wondering why the Parthenon is a recreation of that, with the goddess Athena, like they have the recreated statue of Athena.
It's 1:1 scale, isn't it?
It is. It's huge. It's very intimidating. She towers over you. And then there's an art museum and also a museum about the history of the World's Fair that this Parthenon was the centerpiece of. But it was kind of like the idea of like a World's Fair. They had different pavilions with parts of the world, basically like Epcot, where they had people demonstrating and talking about and showing the culture of that land. So that's another aspect of a World's Fair, I guess, is introduction.
Right.
Yeah.
Or at least the early 1900s version of an introduction to world culture.
Yeah, it's like a commercial Olympics. It's supposed to bring everyone together and show all the progress of humanity and be the opposite of war.
Yes.
It looks like the first one was held in London's Hyde Park in 1851. So the mid 1800s.
Is that also
1800s.
the Great Exhibition from the Crystal Palace?
It said the Great Exhibition. Yes, you are correct. Yes, of the Crystal Palace.
Yes.
Oh, that's fun. Yeah, maybe we can do a program, take a tour of some world fairs.
Sadly, the Crystal Palace is no longer with us.
That's
Sadly,
too bad.
But again, we still have the globe thing that you were talking about, and we have the Parthenon. So there's some interesting relics.
I remember learning when I was doing my research about the Girl Scouts founder Juliet Gordon-Low, who I'm the resident expert on. She got to see the Eiffel Tower at the World's Fair. I can't remember what year. I think it was 1898 was when that happened, but she got to see it in Paris, which is so cool.
You know what's funny is when it first went up, the Parisians were so hacked off.
They did not
like it. They did not like it.
This will ruin our skyline. There's nothing Parisian or French about this.
And now how many
iron
people
monstrosity
engaged there now?
I know.
Like,
I mean, the little models you buy at the gift shop fund the entire French national government.
Yeah,
probably. If you can even get to near it. I tried to go and just buy tickets.
Oh yeah.
It was full.
Yeah, I bet.
Oh yeah.
I ended up just walking up the Arc de Triomphe anyway, and then that was really fun.
Yeah,
too.
there you go.
Allons avant de la patrie, le jour de gloire est arrivé.
Nice.
Thanks.
Nicely done. All right, our next question is from Alma. Yay! Alma and Gabby, I bet. Let's see. Alma says, we just saw 42nd Street, the musical, which is set in 1933, just like Annie. They only mention money struggles in the song We're in the Money. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I would imagine that perhaps they didn't... Maybe they were thinking toward a brighter time. Like, there's no depression. But the rest of the question. Let's see. Alma says, my big family story is that one Christmas during the Depression, my grandma bought her 3 nieces each a bike for Christmas. She lived at home with her parents still and worked in a department store in downtown San Diego. So my question is, how many people were not affected or minimally affected by the Depression? This also brings us back to the mill program that we did, because during our research, we also learned that Chicopee Mill, which is here in Gainesville, didn't suffer very much through the Depression, and they were very unique in they were probably among the most commercial utopia that you could get, because this was a mill that was created by Johnson & Johnson in 1927 or so is when it was built, and it really was this new innovative model. Instead of having the factory worker churn of just low retention rate and just getting new, young, sometimes children, many times children, people in the factories, they were like, what if we made it hospitable and great to live here so that people would stay? So they actually made neighborhoods, the whole landscape was intentionally designed almost to look like a college campus and not even have work, the mill being the center of everything. They had, community centers, electricity and sewage at that early of a time for that. So, and I read that they were very they did very well, and many of the families that worked at the Chicopee mill didn't suffer from the Depression, and the mill, because the mill itself didn't suffer. It was a cotton mill, so there's always a need for cotton. But that was the first thing that came to my mind when you said that. But what other demographics might not have suffered as much during the Depression?
From a broad perspective, you have to remember that the Depression was a big deal, and it affected a lot of people. But unemployment hovered between 25 and 35%, which is way higher than it should be in normal. But that also means that 70 to 75% of people did have jobs and were working. It's just a larger proportion of the population was unemployed, and it tended to focus on certain demographics and geographic locations.
So if you have some people who are perhaps in a industry that is more affected, perhaps because if you run a grocery store, people are still going to need groceries.
Right.
Versus if you are a luxury car designer, well, people probably aren't going to be buying luxury cars. So they might have to lay some people off at the factory because their production is going to be much more scaled down. So I think I was also, as we were doing our world history with our Homeschool Connection world history, it hurt. I was looking at it, England, so how the Great Depression affected England, because this was, America at this point had become a little bit of a world superpower, not quite as much as it was after World War II, but after World War I it was asserting itself as one, and therefore the Great Depression affected the rest of the world and the world economy as globalization began to continue out throughout the 19th century, and like dock workers in like Southampton got hit really hard because shipping wasn't going to be as much, and the manufacturing wasn't going to be as much. But if you have a cushy desk job, if you're a lawyer, if you're a banker, as long as your bank didn't have a run on money and was closed, you were fine. I think about I generally go back to American Girl dolls and storytelling, but in the American Girl dolls they have Kit, who is the central character for their 1930s. That's the doll you can buy, and that's the story that they tell is, the Great Depression through Kit's eyes. And Kit, her family was greatly affected. Her father loses his job. She has an older brother who's graduating and going into the workforce and can't find work. So that's also a demographic who's going to have trouble because they don't have a job. They have to find one. And at a time where, well, there's not a lot of jobs to be had, how do you find one if you've never had one? So he goes off and he works with the CCC, the Conservation Corps, the one for young that FDR puts in place.
Civilian Conservation Corps, yes.
For young men. Yeah. So that's a demographic that can be helped by that, because that was one that was severely affected, was young men, and they wanted those young men to be able to either provide for their. Actually, you couldn't be married to be Conservation Corps, so you could therefore help your parents and family that way, but it would not be your family as in your wife or children, and that's what Kit's brother did in the story. But also Kit has a friend throughout the story named Ruthie, and Ruthie's fine throughout the entire Depression because her dad's a banker. He's the one who gave out all these loans, and basically the point of the drama is that Ruthie's dad holds the loan on Kit's house, or the mortgage on Kit's house, and Kit's family's not doing great. So they have to rent out their house for boarders. They have their Aunt Millie, who lived on a farm, come in and teaches them how to raise chickens and grow their own vegetables and eat clover and all of those things. But I think that story does a good job of showing okay, so these are the kind of people who are going to be affected. I think Kit's dad was one of the people who was basically on an assembly line, and I think he goes off to Detroit or something, one of those larger infrastructure places, in an attempt to find work. So I think it really affected the people who were making goods that people no longer felt like they had the surplus income to buy.
Right.
And farm families too, right? Because that's the thing.
The Dust Bowl too hit them. So
so if your crop yield goes down, even if your crop yield goes up, but you're not getting as much for the crop, you can't pay the mortgage you took out on the farm and the house to buy the seed and the equipment, and you go in debt, and the bank comes to take your farm, and suddenly you're not just unemployed, you've lost everything. You've lost the place you live, you've lost your land. Farmers don't know immediately how to run assembly lines. It's hard to find another job because all the farmers got them. So it's one of those things. That's a particular demographic.
Yeah, that was also greatly.
The banking and the farming and the markets were all tied together, and it's.
Oh, if you were a stockbroker, you were probably not doing great either.
I would imagine so.
Right.
But otherwise.
Well,
yeah. No, that's a great question. Yeah. Thank you so much, Alma, and Gabby. I would imagine too is there. Someone asked Laura asked, are there still World's Fairs? And as far as I can tell from the old internet, there hasn't been a World's Fair in North America since 1986 in Vancouver. I don't see if there's any in the lineup elsewhere, but that would be fun though. I guess. Yeah. I would imagine it's there's so many niche conventions now that perhaps that's sort of the way to go about it. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, remember, and that's back in the days before the internet. You couldn't. Now I just Google it, a machine that I want to see, or the culture of Botswana, and it's right. there. Boom. Yeah, I don't have to travel, and it doesn't have to all come together and come out in a printed catalog.
Yeah. But Josh does have an excellent idea. Josh says that we should do a family day or a virtual program about the various world fairs. I think that would be really fun. Yeah. So don't worry, I'm going to be writing it down. World fairs in general.
Libba the idea scribe.
Yes. Yes, that's the real reason we do LoFi history.
That's right.
So let's see. Our next question, we're going to go to Josh's question. So Josh has this question. What if, and of course I have to do our Josh. Wait, no, that's not it. Where is it? There it is. Yay. What if indeed. So Josh's what if for us today is, what if the Tet Offensive completely failed on all levels and the Americans and Southern Vietnamese pushed back the Viet Cong? Would the Americans in South Vietnam have won without... And that's where it stops. I
know the answer.
Go for it, Glenn.
The Tet Offensive did fail. Boing, boing, boing.
Okay, you're going to have to
The Tet...
I don't know what the Tet Offensive is.
Okay, so...
But I'm
picture
offended
it, Vietnam,
by it.
1968.
Okay,
right?
I'm there.
America is there. They have been involved. They've escalated. They're trying to destroy the guerrilla forces of the North in the South, which are the Viet Cong, as well as fight the regular forces of North Vietnam, which are the NVA, the North Vietnamese Army. Okay. So the North Vietnamese have this plan. What they want to do is they want to have the Viet Cong. This is what the Tet Offensive is. The Viet Cong, the guerrillas in the South, all at once. Tet is basically the Vietnamese New Year, by the way. So this is a holiday. There's supposed to be a 1 to 2 week truce where no one's going to fight. That's how they get you. So during this truce, the Viet Cong, the guerrillas in the South, are going to rise up in the thousands and attack every single American military installation that they can get to. Whilst simultaneously, the North is going to not necessarily advance into the South and attack, but they're going to try to get the attention of American forces up near the North Vietnamese border. So this is the plan. The Viet Cong rise up. The Americans think it's truce time, so the Americans are taken completely by surprise. There are initial gains by the Viet Cong, but what ends up happening is the American forces react very quickly and very aggressively, and they're able to isolate and take out most of the Viet Cong operatives. The Viet Cong in the Tet Offensive suffers something like 60 to 70% casualties. They cease to be an effective fighting force, right? So the Tet Offensive does fail militarily. What actually happens is the Americans had been telling the folks at home, we've got this under control, we have them on the run, everything's contained, and then all of a sudden, all this pops up all over the country, and it makes the U.S. military looks like it's totally lost control. It hadn't actually, but perception can be everything. And so the folks getting regular daily reports from doomsaying reporters that are actually stationed in Vietnam. And then this is when Walter Cronkite comes on and says, after seeing this, I just don't see how we can win in Vietnam.
Wow.
Totally tanks American morale, and it becomes a political victory for the North Vietnamese. Militarily, they're crushed. They are severely beaten. So the Tet Offensive militarily did fail. Politically, it turned out to be the greatest boon the North Vietnamese and Ho Chi Minh ever experienced.
And that's actually something I see now a few lines later.
Oh, yes.
Josh mentioned the psychological and moral loss that the Tet Offensive in real life caused. So basically saying,
right.
like, yeah, if it...
How could it undo? Well, you know, that's the thing. I think there was huge division in the United States by this point.
Yeah.
There were lots of anti-war protests. What we don't usually hear about is there were also... not pro-war, but let's say pro-American effort rallies as well. We don't hear so much about those. Most of the anti-war protests were by very young people who were or were very soon going to be eligible for the draft because the draft was still operating in America during the Vietnam War. That's how they were keeping people in the military. So I think the only way that it would not have been this psychological morale disaster for the Americans is if more of the media, and especially Walter Cronkite, the conscience of America, had seen this. Well, America has really turned things around since the early days of this offensive, and it does look like we're going to win this war. It's amazing the power that media has over the hearts and minds of Americans, right?
Even just like a positive spin on something.
Right. I think that's what it comes down to, is that media approach. So, you know, the thing is, America did not have a clear set of conditions for victory in the Vietnam War. That was, from a Sun Tzu tactical strategic perspective, that was its great downfall, is there were no preset conditions for victory. How do you know you've won the Vietnam War? They didn't know. Is it totally defeating the North? Is it having the South invade the North and make it one country? They couldn't decide. They couldn't commit. And so America's efforts in Vietnam were very cloudy and mixed over the 10-year period of the war. And so that confusion, that lack of a singular direction and vision greatly affected the way the military operated, and it greatly affected the perspective of the folks at home. And wars primarily are won not so much with battlefield victories, although those are important, but the will of the populace, especially in democracies. In democracies, the will of the people has to be behind the effort. And if they're not, it doesn't matter how successful your military is. And the American people, in effect, lost the will to continue in Vietnam. Whether that was a good or bad call morally, psychologically, politically, ideologically, that's a conversation for another day.
Right, yeah. That was an excellent question as usual, Josh. Let's see, and we got another question from Margaret, who I believe is perhaps joining us for the first time. So hello, Margaret and more. And they are from East Central. So they say hello from East Central Kansas, and their question is how much immigration came up the Mississippi versus Ellis Island? This is interesting because I was
Mississippi.
while I was I was totally listening, Glenn.
Sure, you were.
Googling.
I know you were.
But I mean, I guess I'm curious as to when we're talking about, because I mean there's a lot of immigration happening in the United States in the like 1800s and early 1900s, but if you want to go way back, then we can talk about Spanish claims to what was the Mississippi area. Maybe outside of the Native American population that was already there, who is immigrating or coming to that territory of the Mississippi and what I would assume is a very valuable resource, the Mississippi River. Can you sort of give us a bird's eye view of that, Glenn or Marie?
Yeah. So the French were the first to begin to populate and settle at the mouth of the Mississippi in what becomes New Orleans and that area.
Well, you also have the Spanish. Was it Spanish first?
Yeah, that's what I see.
Spanish was first.
Yeah, so the Spanish, but then the French, okay. Here's what happens. Because you talked about immigrating up the Mississippi.
Right.
No one immigrates up the Mississippi. What happens is, because literally the water in the Mississippi flows so fast and so hard, it's almost impossible until steam engines to go up the Mississippi.
Oh.
So France begins to settle way up in northeastern North American continent.
Okay,
the Spanish settle along the Gulf Coast, right?
Right.
Then the French basically get on the rivers, the Ohio, and float down the Mississippi. So the French established, mirror image here. The French established themselves in New France, in what's now Canada and Quebec and those areas. And they begin to establish settlements coming down the Mississippi River.
Yeah.
So floating down the Mississippi River is where the French and the Spanish start to have conflicts. And the French eventually tend to control what becomes New Orleans because they can send stuff down rather than sending stuff up. Does that make sense? So the Spanish start out, and then the French start that very heavily. And then more French are sent there as the Acadians are removed during the 7 Years' War and sent to that area, which means you've got the French coming in. And then it changes hands a couple of times as Spain and France are on different sides of different wars, like the 7 Years' War, like the American Revolution, and things like that. And then the Americans finally get it with the Louisiana Purchase, which was originally just to purchase New Orleans, but ended up being the entire territory. And the Americans won it again because it flows south. And in 1800, 1/5 of the American economy of exports came down the Mississippi River.
Wow.
And so that means that Americans are quickly going to settle it far, far more than the French and the Spanish ever did. But I think, skipping ahead to what you were talking about, Libba, I don't think there were formal points of embarkation for immigration in the late 19th and early 20th century in the Mississippi area.
Yeah, like
in the Delta
Island.
region.
Right. Yeah.
There was some Irish immigration, from what I can tell. During the potato famine.
Yes.
They wanted to go places because they were starving.
Yes. And this is around the 1830s or so?
1840s and 50s is when we see most of the potato famine situation. Right. And a lot of them ended up in New Orleans because Irish are predominant.
Catholics.
Yes. Basically, if you're not from Northern Ireland and you're from the other part of mainland Ireland, you are Catholic. And therefore, going to another place that is predominantly Catholic,
French, Spanish,
New Orleans, they found a home there that felt more of their home.
Right.
So there was a fair amount of Irish immigration to New Orleans at that time. A lot of them ended up being housemaids and just good old fashioned laborers there. Because New Orleans was also, with 1/5 of the economy coming down that river, New Orleans is incredibly wealthy.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they found a lot of domestic work and just more physical labor work there.
Yeah, and then I'm also reading, and I think most people could connect the dots with this. I mean, you're talking about all of this production, and so pre-Civil War, there's also a large black population there because of the
expansion of slavery. Yeah.
There's also a large, before American Civil War, large enslaved population there. There's also a large free person of color population there because the French and Spanish had more lenient policies about slavery and actually made it to where you could purchase your freedom in a more effective manner than in America we say you can.
Right.
But could you?
Right. Yeah. That's fascinating. That's something that's as I've listened to y'all and your programs and everything, our programs, just the kind of the strata of different experiences that you could have, or the leniency, like you were saying. I remember reading Frederick Douglass, a biography about Frederick Douglass, and just the difference between him being hired out to one man in Maryland versus another was like two extremes, and it really just depended, on that person. But culturally, that's interesting that the Spanish and the French would generally have more lenient terms as far as their
There was even there was an entire battalion of free colored men who fought with Andrew Jackson against the British at the Battle of New Orleans.
Oh wow, yeah.
So
fascinating.
And therefore, New Orleans becomes a really interesting place as you have a lot of different cultures coming together, heavily influenced by French, Spanish culture. You really don't have American culture come in until,
well,
I mean, they're American culture, but there's not.
Well, even Eastern, like traditional European American, but that's why some people have argued that New Orleans is the most American city because it is the most gigantic conglomerate of everything, and what cool. theoretically is more American than this total conglomeration of all these different cultures.
New Orleans
together.
Is the melting pot. Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking the New Orleans themselves, in the early 1800s, did not consider themselves American, even though America had purchased their land.
I see, right.
They were like, we are New Orleans.
Yes.
We are not American. We are New Orleans.
Yeah.
We will help you for a price.
Yes. Well, we're getting to the end of Lo-Fi. We've got one more question, so perfect timing. And this one comes from Richard. Going back to World War II and Germany, how aware were the German civilians of how the war was going during World War II? Was the media was there a tight, grasp on the narrative itself? If I'm the average German citizen, I mean, what do I think is going on? What information is allowed to me?
There's official information that comes through the newspapers and the radio, which makes things look not too bad. We are winning. The Allies are cowardly. The Soviets are subhuman. Don't worry, we're Germans. We're going to win. But when they look up and see Allied bombers flattening their cities and realize that their food supplies are drastically going down to almost zero, they start to get the practical side of how badly the war is going.
Right.
Or, if you live, depending on how far the war goes, when you see Allied troops marching through your neighborhood,
yeah, right.
Maybe you lost.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the Germans, after a certain point, fairly early, I would say most Germans realized that the war was going poorly and they were probably going to lose by early 44, certainly after the Normandy invasions.
Yeah.
And they all began to realize, so we know a little bit about the Americans and we know a little bit about the Soviets. And we know that they're both coming to get us. And we really want the Americans to get here. We know that Germany has done some very bad things. And we know that when the end does come and we have to surrender, the Allies are going to treat us very poorly. There was a common saying, enjoy the war because the peace is going to be hell. And for many Germans, it was for decades.
Yeah. Excellent question, Richard. And as always, thank you everyone for joining us for Lo-Fi History today. We will be back. Let's see. We plan on doing these the first Tuesday of every month. Sometimes people named Libba get sick and then you can't, but feeling much better now. So that's why we had to do it this week. But it looks like we will be back on June 7th. And of course, do make sure that you are here tomorrow at 2 p.m. Or really, the premiere is going to be tomorrow for Elephants, Donkeys, and Uncle Sam, the political cartoons of Thomas Nast, which is a fascinating program from our 2021 members season that we're going to debut to the public. And of course, speaking of our memberships, it's always a good idea to become a digital member of the Northeast Georgia History Center so you can enjoy really awesome programs like historic candle making, woo, and so many others. So thanks so much for joining us, and we will see you hopefully sooner than later. So stay safe and take care. Bye, everyone.
Bye.